In the grand narrative of nations, there are few stories as stunning as Vietnam, a country that, within the memory of a single generation, was defined by the geography of war, is now defined by the logistics of global manufacturing. A landscape once scarred by craters is now punctuated by the clean geometry of semiconductor fabs and skyscrapers. From near-total isolation, it has engineered itself into the indispensable node of the modern world, the assembly line for the planet. The word we use for this kind of transformation is a miracle, an economic miracle. It's a convenient label. It's satisfying. It implies a force of nature, an almost magical event that defies rational explanation. But what if it wasn't a miracle? What if that word is just a placeholder for something far more interesting? What if the story of modern Vietnam isn't about magic, but about machinery? A story about a deliberate, high-risk, and brutally executed act of systems engineering. This is the thesis of our analysis, that countries, like complex machines, run on an operating system, a core code made of laws, incentive structures, and infrastructure protocols that dictates how every component functions. And in 1986, the architects of modern Vietnam realized their system had failed. It wasn't in need of an update. It needed to be wiped. What they built to replace it is one of the most fascinating and paradoxical systems on Earth. A hybrid engine that runs on the explosive fuel of market capitalism, while being housed in the rigid chassis of single-party communist rule. It's an architecture of contradictions, and it works. So for the next hour, we are not going to admire the miracle. We are going to decompile the machine. We will examine its source code, trace its wiring, and identify the core protocols that allowed an entire nation to plug into the global grid. We will also search for the bugs in the system, the hidden costs, and the critical vulnerabilities that are now becoming apparent as we approach the 2026 checkpoint. This is the story of how you rewrite a nation. To understand the machine Vietnam built, you must first perform an autopsy on the one it destroyed. After 1975, with the country unified under a single flag, the architects of the new state imported a blueprint. It was the Soviet model, a centrally planned, top-down command economy. On paper, it promised rationality, equality, and rapid industrialization, guided by the objective hand of the state. In practice, it was like trying to run a complex biological organism on a rigid, mechanical script. It was an act of profound systemic rejection. The nation's economic antibodies attacked the foreign tissue of the state plan. The result was a decade-long autoimmune crisis that brought the country to the edge of non-existence. The first critical failure was a breakdown in the nervous system. Central planning has a fatal information problem. Imagine a single brain in Hanoi attempting to process the real-time needs, outputs, and efficiencies of millions of individual cells: farmers, fishermen, small merchants, factory workers. It is a computational impossibility. A central planner, no matter how brilliant or well-intentioned, cannot know the subtle realities of a rice paddy in the Mekong Delta. They don't know the quality of the soil that year, the health of the water buffalo, the morale of the farmer. All they have is a target on a spreadsheet. And so, the state issued its commands from a position of profound ignorance. It set grain quotas that were physically impossible to meet. It ordered factories to produce tractors for which there were no spare parts, or textiles in colors nobody wanted to wear. The result was a phantom economy. On paper, targets were being met. In reality, warehouses were filled with useless goods, while the things people actually needed, food, medicine, tools, were chronically scarce. The system was flying blind. This information failure directly created the second, more corrosive failure, the collapse of the incentive structure. A human being is a rational economic actor. If a farmer knows that any surplus grain they produce beyond their own subsistence will be confiscated by the state for a price far below its real value, what is their logical response? They don't produce a surplus. They produce exactly what they need to survive, and perhaps a little more to hide from the local cadre. They have no incentive to innovate, to improve their yields, or to work harder. The system punished ambition and rewarded mediocrity. This wasn't a moral failing on the part of the people. It was a perfectly logical response to a fundamentally illogical system. The same paralysis gripped the state-owned factories. A manager's career depended on meeting a centrally planned quota, not on the quality or desirability of the product. So they produced shoddy goods, using as many resources as possible to justify their budget, knowing it didn't matter if the products ever sold or functioned. The entire economic organism was disincentivized from excellence, from efficiency, from life. And from the cracks of this dying official economy, a second, shadow system began to grow. The black market. It wasn't just a place for criminals. It was the only truly functioning part of the economy. It was where the farmer could sell their hidden rice for a real price. It was where you could find a spare part for a motorbike, smuggled across the border. This black market was the system's most damning critique of itself. It was a spontaneous, decentralized network that demonstrated where true value and real information lay. It was messy, illegal, and inefficient, but it worked, because it was based on real supply and demand. It was the creative impulse of the Vietnamese people, refusing to be extinguished by the destructive logic of the state plan. This systemic rot wasn't just abstract. It had a physical reality. The technosocial architect would see a nation seizing up. The logistical network designed for moving troops was entirely unsuited for moving goods. The information and incentive failures cascaded into a full-blown circulatory collapse. Mountains of coal would pile up at the mines in the north because the transport quotas didn't align with the production quotas. Fish would rot on the docks in coastal towns while inland cities starved for protein. Factories would sit idle for weeks, waiting for a single raw material that was stuck in a bureaucratic limbo hundreds of kilometers away. The country was a body where the limbs refused to talk to the brain, and the arteries were clogged. Every part was working against every other part. By the early 1980s, the official system was producing little more than paralysis and poverty. The final, decisive blow came from outside. This broken machine, for all its flaws, was on a form of external life support. Its primary patron, the Soviet Union and its allied Comecon trading bloc, provided a steady stream of aid, cheap fuel, and a guaranteed market for Vietnam's low-quality goods. This geopolitical alignment was the only thing keeping the system from total collapse. But by the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union was itself a dying empire. Its own economy was sclerotic. The flow of aid slowed to a trickle. The subsidies vanished. Suddenly, Vietnam was forced to sell its goods on the open market, and the world was not interested in tractors that didn't run. The external shock severed the last thread holding the official economy together. The result was catastrophic. With no real goods being produced and a government printing money to cover its vast deficits, the currency collapsed. Inflation hit 400% in 1985. By 1986, it was over 700%. A lifetime of savings could be wiped out in a month. This wasn't just an economic crisis. It was the complete death of the old system. Its logic had been followed to its conclusion: total failure. But this is the brutal calculus of creative destruction. The system had to fail this completely, this publicly, this painfully. Its failure had to be so absolute that no one, not even the most conservative hardliners in the party, could argue for its preservation. The collapse created the political space for the unthinkable. It wasn't a time for reform. It was a time for demolition. The ground had been cleared. Script segment output. Core 1, the market. This was the engine of creative destruction and wealth creation. The party leadership, in a stunning ideological reversal, essentially admitted that the decentralized, chaotic, information-rich network of the market was infinitely better at allocating resources and setting prices than any central planner could ever be. They decided to unleash it. The first step was brutally simple. They pulled the plug on the old system's life support. Price controls on 90% of goods were abolished almost overnight. The currency, the D-stroke letter 1ED3NG, was massively devalued to reflect its real market value. This was an act of shock therapy. It vaporized the phantom wealth of the old system and forced the entire country to confront the reality of supply and demand. Simultaneously, they reinstalled the most fundamental piece of market software: private property and individual incentive. Decree 10, issued in 1988, is arguably one of the most important documents in modern Vietnamese history. It effectively decollectivized agriculture. It granted farmers long-term leases on their land, and crucially, gave them the right to keep and sell their surplus on the open market. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. A nation that had been on the brink of famine, a net importer of rice, became the world's third-largest rice exporter within a decade. Why? Because millions of individual processors, the farmers, were now incentivized to maximize their output. The system began rewarding ambition instead of punishing it. This logic was then applied across the economy. Private businesses were allowed to form. Foreign investment, once seen as a tool of colonial exploitation, was now actively courted. The market core was switched on. Core 2, the state. This is the part of the hybrid that is often misunderstood or ignored. While the party unleashed the market to create wealth, it never, for a second, relinquished its absolute control over the political and strategic direction of the country. This is the socialist orientation. It does not mean the state runs the factories. It means the state sets the parameters within which the market is allowed to operate. It is the system administrator with root access. The state maintains a monopoly on political power through the Communist Party. It controls the commanding heights of the economy: land, critical resources like minerals, and strategic sectors like banking, energy, and telecommunications, often through massive state-owned conglomerates. These SOEs, like Viettel or Petro-Vietnam, are not the inefficient dinosaurs of the past. They are hybrid corporations that operate on market principles but serve the strategic goals of the state. This dual-core architecture is the key. The market is allowed to be brutally efficient, to create winners and losers, to generate enormous wealth. But the state acts as the ultimate arbiter and firewall. It directs investment towards national priorities. It can crush any private actor who becomes a political threat. It maintains social order with a powerful internal security apparatus. It uses its control of land to steer urban development and industrial zoning. This creates a unique dynamic. An entrepreneur in Vietnam has far more economic freedom than their parents did, but they operate with the clear understanding that this freedom is a privilege granted by the party, not an inalienable right. The market is a powerful tool, but the party still holds the toolbox. The initial phase of installing this new kernel was one of controlled demolition. The creative destruction wasn't just aimed at the old command economy, but at the bloated state sector it had created. Thousands of inefficient state-owned enterprises were allowed to go bankrupt or were forcibly merged. Over 1.5 million people were laid off from the state sector, a staggering number in a country of 65 million. This was a politically risky, socially painful process. But it was deemed necessary. The old, diseased tissue had to be cut away for the new system to grow. This was not the gentle renovation of official propaganda. It was radical surgery, performed without anesthetic. It was the violent, necessary birth of the modern Vietnamese economic machine. The kernel was installed. Now, it was time to write the software that would connect it to the rest of the world. Script segment output. Direction notes. Music, the low, tense synth pulse evolves. It becomes more structured, more rhythmic, almost like the boot-up sequence of a powerful computer. Add subtle clicking sounds like relays and switches activating in a server rack. Visuals should be highly symbolic and minimalist. Imagine a dark screen with a single command prompt. The words initiate, D-stroke letter 1ED5 IM letter 1EDB I are typed out. This is followed by animations of old, tangled lines of code being deleted and replaced by new, clean, modular code. Show a dual-core processor, with one core labeled market and the other state, activating in perfect sync. Pacing. The delivery should be precise and confident, like a lead engineer describing a new piece of architecture. The language is intentionally technical but explained through clear metaphors. There is a sense of immense, controlled power being unleashed. Direction notes. Title line D-stroke letter 1ED5, IM letter 1EDB, I. Installing the new kernel /title line. Dialog block. In the vocabulary of national transformations, few terms are as loaded as D-stroke letter 1ED5 IM letter 1EDB I. Renovation. It's a word that sounds gentle, gradual, like remodeling a house. This is a profound understatement. D-stroke letter 1ED5 IM letter 1EDB I, initiated at the 6th National Congress in December of 1986, was not a renovation. It was a complete systems overhaul. It was the political equivalent of ripping out a computer's aging, buggy, single-core processor and installing a radical new dual-core architecture. It was the installation of a new kernel for the Vietnamese state. The official name for this new operating system is the socialist-oriented market economy. To a Western ear, this phrase sounds like a contradiction in terms, a piece of political doublespeak. But to the system's architect, it is a precise technical description of a hybrid machine. It is the central, paradoxical genius of the entire Vietnamese model. The architects of D-stroke letter 1ED5 IM letter 1EDB I looked at the wreckage of the command economy and made a crucial diagnosis. The old system failed because it tried to do everything. It tried to be both the central processing unit and the entire network. The new system would separate these functions. It would create a kernel with two distinct, yet deeply integrated cores. Script segment output. The first layer of this new protocol was diplomatic. A country still subject to a punitive U.S. trade embargo and viewed with suspicion by its neighbors was not a viable investment destination. So, Vietnam began a methodical campaign to normalize its relationship with the world. It withdrew its troops from Cambodia, a key sticking point. It joined ASEAN in 1995, embedding itself within the institutional framework of Southeast Asia. But the real prize was normalizing relations with its former enemy, the United States. This was the master key. The lifting of the U.S. embargo in 1994 was the starting gun. It was a signal to the entire Western world that Vietnam was open for business. The second and far more complex layer was legal and institutional. International corporations do not invest billions of dollars based on promises. They invest based on predictable rules, enforceable contracts, and stable legal frameworks. Vietnam in the early 90s had none of this. Its legal system was designed for a command economy. So, they began to import and adapt the source code of international commercial law. The 1987 Law on Foreign Investment was a landmark. It was primitive by today's standards, but it established the radical principle that foreign companies could own 100% of their ventures in Vietnam. It was a statement of intent. This was followed by a relentless series of upgrades. Each new law, each new decree, was like a software patch designed to fix bugs and improve compatibility. They created special economic zones and industrial parks. Think of these as physical USB ports, specific geographic locations where the rules were even more streamlined, the taxes lower, and the bureaucracy minimized, designed for easy plug-and-play access for foreign factories. The signing of the bilateral trade agreement with the United States in 2001 was a quantum leap. It required Vietnam to undertake massive reforms in areas like intellectual property rights, state-owned enterprise transparency, and market access for foreign services. It was a grueling process of forcing its domestic legal code to conform to the strict standards of the world's largest economy. Finally, accession to the World Trade Organization in 2007 completed the primary installation. By joining the WTO, Vietnam agreed to bind itself to a global set of rules. It had adopted the TCP/IP of international trade. Let's use a very specific metaphor. Vietnam built a National Application Programming Interface, an API. An API is a set of rules and tools that allows different software applications to communicate with each other. A company like Samsung or Intel, before investing $20 billion, doesn't want to learn a completely new, bespoke programming language. They want to interact with a country through a standardized, well-documented API. Vietnam's legal and bureaucratic reforms were the construction of this API. The law on foreign investment was the initial API documentation. The trade agreements were the software development kits. The special economic zones were the dedicated servers with guaranteed uptime. This standardization protocol achieved three critical things. First, it de-risked Vietnam for foreign capital. It made the investment environment predictable. Second, it created a powerful incentive for domestic reform. To comply with these international agreements, Vietnam was forced to make its own bureaucracy more transparent and efficient. It had to level the playing field between state-owned companies and private ones. The external pressure became a tool for driving internal change. Third, and most importantly, it sent a clear and unambiguous signal to the world. The signal was, our hardware is different, our political operating system is unique, but our connection protocols are universal. You know how to work with us because we have deliberately made our system compatible with yours. This was the hidden wiring that made the subsequent manufacturing boom possible. Without the boring, unglamorous, decades-long work of building this universal adapter, the Vietnamese miracle would have remained a purely local phenomenon, a powerful computer with no way to connect to the internet. /script segment output. Direction notes. Music, the rhythmic, boot-up synth track becomes more complex and layered. Add a sense of outward expansion and connection. Introduce a clear, consistent digital pulse, like a network heartbeat. Visuals should be abstract representations of standardization. Show mismatched puzzle pieces being replaced by uniform interlocking blocks. Animate a chaotic jumble of different plugs and sockets morphing into a single, universal standard. The key visual metaphor is an API, or a universal adapter being designed and implemented on a national scale. Pacing. The delivery becomes more strategic and analytical. The narrator is now a network architect explaining how a closed, proprietary system was opened up to the global network. The tone is less about internal politics and more about external strategy. /direction notes. Title line: The Standardization Protocol. How to plug a nation into the world /title line. Dialog block. A powerful new computer is useless if it has no ports. A revolutionary operating system is an academic curiosity if it cannot run any software. After installing the dstroke letter 1ED5 IM letter 1EDBI kernel, Vietnam's architects faced a fundamental problem of interoperability. They had designed a fast, hybrid internal system, but to the outside world, to the global network of capital, technology, and trade, it was an alien architecture. It was a closed box. To survive and grow, Vietnam had to transform itself from an isolated, proprietary system into an open standard platform. It had to create a universal adapter that would allow the rest of the world to plug in. This process was not accidental. It was a deliberate, patient, multi-decade engineering project. The goal was to systematically rewrite the country's legal and diplomatic code to make it legible and trustworthy to foreign capital. From the perspective of a geopolitical resource analyst, this wasn't about ideology. It was about physics. Capital, like energy, follows the path of least resistance. Vietnam's mission was to lower the resistance of its borders to near zero for investment, while maintaining high resistance for political interference. They needed to build a one-way data diode on a national scale. Script segment output. It offered a potent, almost irresistible value proposition. First, the demographics were perfect. Vietnam had a young, literate, and disciplined workforce, with a population hitting its demographic peak just as China's was beginning to age. Second, the labor was affordable, a fraction of the cost of its northern neighbor. Third, its geography was a logistician's dream, a long coastline with deep-water port locations, sitting directly on the world's busiest shipping lanes. And finally, and most critically, the government offered a stable, predictable political environment. For a corporation planning a 20-year investment, political stability is the ultimate currency. Vietnam's single-party state, once a barrier, was now pitched as a feature. No strikes, no sudden policy reversals from a new administration, just a consistent, top-down focus on economic development. Vietnam wasn't just offering to be a new factory, it was offering to be a more reliable one. But a strategy is not a reality. To ignite the +1 migration, Vietnam needed a proof of concept. It needed an anchor tenant, a single, massive investor whose sheer scale would create a new center of economic gravity, a force so powerful it would bend the flow of capital and components in its direction. That anchor tenant was Samsung. The scale of Samsung's bet on Vietnam is difficult to comprehend. It is arguably the most significant investment by a single corporation in another country in the 21st century. It began in 2008 with a mobile phone factory in B-1 EAFC Ninh province, then another, and another. Today, Samsung has invested over $20 billion in Vietnam. Its factories produce roughly half of all the smartphones Samsung sells globally. At its peak, Samsung's exports alone accounted for nearly a quarter of Vietnam's entire export revenue. Let me repeat that. One single company generated 25% of an entire nation's exports. It employs hundreds of thousands of Vietnamese workers directly and hundreds of thousands more indirectly. This is the gravity well effect. Samsung's presence was not just additive, it was transformative. A smartphone is not a single product. It is an ecosystem of thousands of components. When Samsung built its massive assembly plants, it created a voracious demand for suppliers. It needed camera modules, casings, charging ports, packaging, and 1,000 other parts. Initially, these were imported. But soon, the gravitational pull of Samsung's demand began to warp the local economy. A constellation of satellite companies, both foreign and domestic, were pulled into Vietnam to be closer to their primary customer. A whole new industrial cluster materialized around Samsung's core, an ecosystem dedicated to feeding the beast. More importantly, Samsung's investment kickstarted a nationwide technological upgrade. Vietnam wasn't just assembling phones. Samsung built one of its largest global research and development centers in Hanoi. It began producing complex components like OLED screens. The country was forced to climb the technological ladder. The workforce had to be retrained, moving from manual assembly to operating complex machinery in sterile clean rooms. The logistical networks had to be upgraded to handle just-in-time delivery of high-value electronics. The power grid had to be made more reliable. The success of Samsung proved that Vietnam could move beyond textiles and footwear. It proved that the Vietnamese workforce and infrastructure were capable of handling the most demanding, highest-stakes manufacturing in the world. The gravity well, once established, became self-reinforcing. Samsung's success was a signal to every other electronics giant. If Samsung could build its flagship products here, so could they. Intel came, building a massive billion-dollar chip assembly and testing facility in Ho Chi Minh City. LG, Panasonic, Foxconn, the contract manufacturer for Apple, all followed, pouring billions more into the country. The China Plus One strategy was no longer a theory. It was a frantic gold rush, and Vietnam was the gold field. The technosocial architect sees this not on a spreadsheet, but on the ground. They see the physical rewriting of the landscape. Ancestral rice paddies in the Red River Delta, farmed for 1,000 years, were rezoned, flattened, and covered with the perfect, sterile geometry of a Foxconn industrial park. New highways were paved to connect these parks to the new deepwater port at Kai Map. The fishing villages of the coast were dwarfed by the cranes and container stacks of the global logistics machine. This wasn't just economic growth. It was a physical re-engineering of the nation's surface, a hardware upgrade to serve the new software of global manufacturing. Vietnam had successfully captured the kinetic energy of global capital and used it to terraform its own economic landscape. It had ceased to be a peripheral player. It had become the new, indispensable center. /script segment output. Direction notes. Music. The synth track becomes more powerful and propulsive, with a driving, rhythmic quality. It should evoke a sense of immense machinery in motion, of massive objects being moved and locked into place. Visuals shift from abstract data to concrete physical reality. Use dramatic drone shots of enormous industrial parks, time-lapses of mega-factories being constructed, and cinematic close-ups of complex assembly lines. The scale should be overwhelming. The aesthetic is one of clean, hyper-efficient, almost futuristic industry. Pacing. The delivery is confident and declarative. The narrator is explaining a successful strategic maneuver. Use hard, specific numbers to anchor the analysis and convey the staggering scale of the transformation. The tone is one of awe at the strategic execution, but still maintaining an analytical distance. /direction notes. Title line. The gravity well. Manufacturing a new center of the world. /title line. Dialogue block. The standardized protocols were in place. The universal adapter was functioning. The Vietnamese system was now open, legible, and connected to the global grid. But this, in itself, guarantees nothing. A perfectly designed port is useless if no one has a reason to plug into it. What Vietnam needed was a catalyst, a massive external force that would compel the world's manufacturing capital to seek a new home. That force was the changing nature of China. By the early 2000s, the workshop of the world was becoming more expensive. Labor costs in China were rising. Its demographic dividend was beginning to fade. Geopolitically, it was becoming less of a partner to the West and more of a peer competitor. For the multinational corporations that had built their empires on the foundation of Chinese manufacturing, a new, critical vulnerability was emerging: overconcentration. They had placed all their eggs in one giant, increasingly complex basket. The logic of risk management demanded a new strategy. It was called China Plus One. The idea was simple: maintain your core operations in China, but build a second, redundant manufacturing hub elsewhere in Asia. It was a supply chain insurance policy. And Vietnam had spent 15 years building the world's best, most attractive insurance office. Script segment output. Vietnam's leadership looked at their geological surveys. They looked at the global dependency on their northern neighbor, and they saw an opportunity of historic proportions. Their strategy is twofold. First, to become a major alternative source for the raw minerals themselves. This involves attracting massive foreign investment and expertise to develop their mines, primarily at the massive Dong Pao deposit. Western nations, Japan and South Korea, desperate to de-risk their supply chains from China, are eager to help. The U.S. has elevated its relationship with Vietnam to a comprehensive strategic partnership, with cooperation on semiconductor supply chains and critical minerals as a stated core objective. Vietnam is positioning itself not just as a manufacturing alternative, but as a resource security partner for the entire Western alliance. But mining the raw ore is the easy part. It is a low-value, environmentally damaging business. The real value and the real strategic power lies in the second part of the plan, building the capacity to process these rare earths. Processing is a notoriously complex and polluting industrial process that China has perfected over decades. It requires immense chemical engineering expertise and a tolerance for environmental degradation that many countries lack. This is Vietnam's next great challenge. They are actively seeking technology transfers and joint ventures to build their own processing plants. Their goal is not just to ship reddish-brown dirt out of the country. Their goal is to ship out high-purity, separated rare earth oxides, and eventually, the high-performance magnets and alloys made from them. It is a direct challenge to China's most strategic monopoly. This resource gambit is inextricably linked to their ambitions in semiconductors. A chip fab without a secure supply of critical minerals is a very expensive paperweight. Vietnam understands this. By connecting their nascent semiconductor industry to their domestic rare earth deposits, they are attempting to build something few countries have: a closed-loop, vertically integrated high-tech ecosystem. The vision is audacious. Mine the rare earths in Lai Chau, process them in a new plant in Hanam, use them to build components for chips assembled in Ho Chi Minh City, and finally, place those chips into a VinFast electric car that was designed and built in Haiphong. This is the holy grail of industrial policy. It is a move to capture value at every single stage of the production chain. From the perspective of the economic futurist, this is a classic Schumpeterian move. Vietnam is attempting to leverage a natural resource endowment to creatively destroy the existing global supply chain structure. It is a high-risk, high-reward strategy. The technical challenges are immense. The environmental costs will be significant, and it is a direct geopolitical provocation to China, which will not give up its monopoly without a fight. They may engage in price wars, flooding the market to make Vietnamese mines unprofitable. They may restrict the export of their own processing technology. But Vietnam is betting that the global thirst for a non-Chinese supply of critical minerals is so strong that it will override these risks. They are leveraging the geopolitical anxieties of the United States and its allies as a form of startup capital for their own industrial ambitions. The strategy is clear. The manufacturing gravity well of Phase 1 was about attracting the world's factories. The resource gambit of Phase 2 is about becoming the world's strategic battery, the indispensable source of the fundamental elements that will power the next industrial revolution. It is a move to own the land, not just the assembly line. Script segment output. Direction notes. Music. The propulsive synth track from the previous segment fades, replaced by a deeper, more ominous and strategic tone. Introduce low, sustained bass notes and a sense of vast, untapped potential. The feeling should be less about frantic activity and more about a slow, powerful, high-stakes chess move. Visuals become geological and elemental. Show cinematic shots of the rugged Vietnamese landscape, then dissolve to abstract, 3D geological survey maps with glowing veins of minerals deep underground. Juxtapose these raw, natural images with ultra-clean, futuristic shots of silicon, wafer production, and semiconductor design labs. Pacing. The delivery slows down, becoming more deliberate and weighty. The narrator is revealing a hidden, deeper layer of the strategy. This is not just about assembly lines anymore. It's about the fundamental building blocks of the 21st century economy. The tone is forward-looking and analytical, assessing a strategic gambit that is still in play. Direction notes. Title line: The Resource Gambit. The Geopolitics of Silicon and Soil. Title line. Dialogue block. The gravity well of manufacturing is a powerful engine, but it is an engine that runs on fuel sourced from elsewhere. The silicon wafers, the exotic metals, the core components of the high-tech ecosystem, they were all being imported. As Vietnam successfully captured the midstream of the global supply chain, the complex assembly, its architects recognized a critical, strategic vulnerability. True technological sovereignty, and the path out of the middle-income trap, does not come from assembling other people's designs from other people's materials. It comes from controlling the entire vertical stack, from the raw element in the ground to the finished chip in the device. The factory model was Phase 1. Phase 2 is a far more ambitious, far more difficult geopolitical gambit, to control the very soil from which the digital age is born. This is where the analysis shifts from economics to geology. Buried beneath the rice paddies and mountains of northern Vietnam lies a strategic prize of immense value, the world's second-largest deposits of rare earth elements. Rare earths, a group of 17 metallic elements, are the secret ingredient of the modern world. They are the vitamins of technology. The powerful magnets in an electric vehicle motor, the lasers in fiber optic cables, the phosphors in your smartphone screen, the guidance systems in a missile. They are all utterly dependent on these obscure metals with names like neodymium, yttrium, and dysprosium. For the last 30 years, one country has held a near-total monopoly on the mining, and more importantly, the complex processing of these elements: China. China's control over the rare earth supply chain is one of its most powerful geopolitical levers. It gives them a chokehold on the global production of everything from F-35 fighter jets to wind turbines. Script segment output. To power these urban machines, Vietnam embarked on one of the most ambitious infrastructure build-outs in the world. This is the physical manifestation of the state's role in the socialist-oriented market economy. While the private sector built the factories, the state, often in partnership with foreign capital, built the circulatory system to connect them. A glance at the map tells the story. The new highways, like the North-South Expressway, are not just for people. They are logistical corridors designed to move components from a port to a factory and finished goods from a factory to the world, with maximum velocity. The new deep-water ports, like Kai Mape letter 1 ECB, V letter 1 EA3, I, are massive industrial interfaces, designed to handle the new generation of ultra-large container vessels. The metro lines currently being tunneled beneath Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City are not just a solution to traffic. They are an attempt to increase the processing power of the urban core by allowing millions of workers to move in and out of it efficiently every day. This is the physical architecture of the new economy, rendered at a national scale. But to truly understand this urban transformation, you have to look at one company that has acted as the state's primary private sector developer, Vingroup. The story of Vingroup is inseparable from the story of modern Vietnam. It is a domestic conglomerate of almost unprecedented scale and scope, and it functions as a key instrument through which the state's vision for a modern, industrialized nation is made real. If the Communist Party is the architect drawing the blueprint for modern Vietnam, Vingroup is the master builder, pouring the concrete. It started with real estate. Vingroup didn't just build apartment buildings. It built entire, self-contained urban ecosystems. Projects like Vinhomes Central Park in Ho Chi Minh City or Vinhomes Ocean Park in Hanoi are not just housing. They are miniature cities, complete with their own international schools, hospitals, shopping malls, and parks. They are clean, orderly, and secure bubbles of modernity. They are the physical containers designed to house the new, upwardly mobile middle class and the influx of foreign expatriates who are managing the new economy. They represent the desired end state of the National Development Project, rendered as a consumer product. But Vingroup's ambition, mirroring that of the state itself, goes far beyond real estate. It has systematically moved into nearly every key sector of the new economy. It runs the country's largest chain of supermarkets and convenience stores. It has a chain of luxury hotels and resorts. It has built theme parks. It has established a non-profit university, VinUni, in partnership with Cornell, to train the next generation of engineers and managers. It has a high-tech division producing smartphones and other electronics. And then there is its most audacious project, VinFast. The decision to create a national car company from scratch and to leapfrog directly to electric vehicles is a perfect microcosm of the entire Vietnamese model. It is a top-down, state-supported, high-risk industrial gambit. It is an attempt to build a high-value, technologically advanced national brand and to compete on the global stage. Building a car is the ultimate industrial challenge. It requires mastery of supply chains, complex manufacturing, software engineering, and global marketing. VinFast's massive, hypermodern factory, built on reclaimed land near Haiphong in a record 21 months, is a statement of will. It is a declaration that Vietnam is no longer content to be the world's assembly line. It intends to design the products itself. Vingroup, and by extension VinFast, acts as a national champion. It is a private company that operates in deep alignment with the state's strategic objectives. Its success is Vietnam's success. Its ability to rapidly build and execute complex projects, from a new university to an EV factory, makes it an indispensable tool for the government. It is the render engine that takes the abstract goals of the 5-year plans and turns them into gleaming towers, functioning assembly lines, and cars on the road. The physical landscape of Vietnam today, its very look and feel, is in many ways a product of this unique symbiosis between a visionary state and its chosen corporate instrument. /script segment output. Direction notes. Music, the music shifts again. The deep, strategic tones are now augmented by a sense of construction and rapid motion. Introduce rhythmic electronic elements and sounds of modern infrastructure, the hum of a high-speed train, the whir of cranes, the digital chime of a smart city. Visuals should be a stunning montage of hypermodern Vietnamese urbanism. Use sweeping, cinematic drone shots of new skylines in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi, focusing on landmark architecture like Landmark 81. Show time lapses of massive infrastructure projects, bridges being built, metro lines being tunneled. The aesthetic is clean, futuristic, and concrete. Pacing. The delivery becomes more grounded and tangible. The narrator is connecting the abstract economic model to the physical world. The tone is descriptive and almost architectural, explaining how a national strategy is literally poured into concrete and steel. The Vingroup case study should be delivered with a sense of focused intensity, highlighting the sheer speed and scale of its operations. Direction notes. Title line: The Render Engine. Rewriting the Urban Landscape title line. Dialogue block. An economic model is just an abstract set of rules until it is rendered in physical space. It must be coded into concrete, steel, and fiber optic cable. The explosive growth of Vietnam's economy, its manufacturing gravity, and its resource ambitions required a complete hardware upgrade for the nation itself. The old, low-density, agrarian landscape was a bottleneck. The new economy needed a new physical container. It needed dense, hyperconnected urban nodes to act as the processors and logistical arteries for its new operating system. What we have witnessed over the past 20 years is the work of a massive, nationwide render engine, rewriting the very landscape of Vietnam in real time. From the technosocial architect's perspective, a city is not just a place where people live. It is a machine for accelerating economic activity. It does this by creating density. Density minimizes the friction of distance and time. It puts the factory manager, the software engineer, the logistics expert, and the banker in the same physical space, allowing for the rapid exchange of information, capital, and goods. The explosive, often chaotic growth of Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi was not a side effect of the economic model. It was a core requirement of it. These cities are the primary servers where the national economy is processed. Script segment output. Nowhere is this cost more apparent or more existentially dangerous than in the Mekong Delta. This is the biological heartland of Vietnam. The nation's rice basket, its primary source of fish and fruit, a region of stunning biodiversity that sustains millions of people. And it is dying. It is being attacked on 3 fronts, all direct consequences of the development model. From upstream, a cascade of massive hydroelectric dams, built by China and Laos to power their own industrial ambitions, are choking off the flow of water and, crucially, the nutrient-rich sediment that has replenished the delta for millennia. From within, the explosive growth of industry and aquaculture is pumping vast quantities of pesticides, fertilizers, and untreated waste into the water channels. And from the sea, rising ocean levels caused by global climate change, a crisis fueled by the very industrial model Vietnam has embraced, are causing saltwater to intrude deeper and deeper inland, killing crops and poisoning wells. The Mekong Delta is a slow-motion catastrophe, a perfect storm of unsustainable development externalities. The price of building factories in the north may well be the destruction of the farms in the south. The second major externality is social. The D-stroke letter 1ED5IM letter 1EDB-I model was spectacularly successful at lifting tens of millions of people out of absolute poverty. But it has simultaneously created a level of wealth inequality that was unimaginable a generation ago. The gap between the new urban elite, the tech entrepreneurs, the factory owners, the real estate tycoons, and the rural farmer or the urban migrant worker is widening into a chasm. While gleaming skyscrapers and luxury SUVs define the skylines of the megacities, a vast portion of the population still lives on a few dollars a day, with limited access to quality health care or education. This creates immense social pressure. Millions of people are leaving their ancestral villages to seek work in the industrial zones, breaking up traditional family and community structures. They often live in precarious conditions, working long hours for low wages, with little social safety net. They are the human cogs in the great manufacturing machine, generating the wealth that they see displayed in the luxury shopping malls, but in which they have a shrinking share. The state, for all its control, has struggled to build the soft infrastructure, the hospitals, the schools, the social welfare systems, at the same pace as it has built the hard infrastructure of highways and ports. This growing inequality is a critical vulnerability. The social contract of the D-stroke letter 1ED5IM letter 1EDB-I era was based on the promise that everyone's life would get better. If a large segment of the population begins to feel that the system is no longer working for them, that the gains are being hoarded at the top, the political stability that has been Vietnam's greatest asset could begin to erode. These are not moral criticisms. They are systemic observations. A development model that prioritizes capital accumulation and export volume above all else will logically underinvest in environmental protection and social equity. These were not seen as core functions of the system. They were secondary concerns, problems to be solved later, once the country was rich enough. But the bill for that deferred maintenance is now coming due. The environmental degradation is beginning to threaten the very agricultural base the country depends on. The social inequality is beginning to strain the social fabric. The exhaust from the engine is starting to choke the engine itself. The final, and greatest, challenge for Vietnam's architects will be to see if this incredibly successful, single-minded machine can be upgraded to perform more than one function at a time. /script segment output. Direction notes. Music, the optimistic, constructive music from the previous segment dissolves. It is replaced by a low, dissonant drone. The sound is unsettling and ambient, suggesting a hidden cost or a system overload. Introduce subtle sounds of environmental stress, the crackle of dry earth, the sound of polluted water. Visuals should provide a stark, unflinching contrast to the sleek modernity of the preceding segments. Use powerful, somber shots of industrial pollution, clogged waterways in the Mekong Delta, and the stark visual divide between gleaming new developments and the struggling rural areas left behind. The aesthetic is critical, journalistic, and sobering. Pacing. The narrator's tone shifts to one of critical analysis and concern. The delivery is slower, more deliberate, and carries a sense of gravity. This is the part of the analysis where the bill comes due. The language is direct and avoids euphemism. The goal is to present these negative consequences not as accidents, but as logical, predictable outputs of the system's design. /direction notes. Title line: the price of the protocol. Calculating the externalities / title line. Dialogue block. No engine, no matter how efficient, runs without producing exhaust. No complex system operates without generating waste products. The Vietnamese economic machine, this powerful hybrid engine of development, was designed for one primary purpose: rapid, sustained, export-oriented growth. And at that task, it has been phenomenally successful. But the relentless focus on that single metric has come at a cost. A cost that is not captured in the official GDP figures or the glowing reports from international investors. These are the externalities of the model. They are the hidden lines of code in the national operating system, the functions that execute silently in the background, creating outputs that are now becoming too large to ignore. From the lens of the externalities analyst, these are not bugs in the system. They are features. They are the logical, unavoidable price of the protocol. The first and most visible cost is written onto the landscape itself: the environmental toll. The same industrial parks that generate billions in export revenue also generate millions of tons of industrial waste, often discharged with inadequate treatment into the nation's rivers. The same surge in urbanization that powers the new economy also places an unbearable strain on antiquated wastewater and garbage disposal systems. The air in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City is now frequently ranked among the most polluted in the world, a toxic soup of industrial emissions, vehicle exhaust, and coal power plant particulates. The relentless pursuit of growth has treated the environment not as a resource to be preserved, but as a free and infinite sink for the waste products of industrialization. Script segment output. The challenge is a shift in the entire economic logic. For 30 years, Vietnam's value proposition was based on inputs. It offered low-cost labor, cheap land, and a stable environment. The next stage of development must be based on outputs. It must be based on intellectual property, on original design, on high-value services, and on homegrown innovation. The country must transition from being the world's factory to being one of the world's laboratories and design studios. This is an order of magnitude more difficult. Building a factory is a matter of capital and concrete. Building an innovation ecosystem is a matter of culture, education, and a tolerance for the chaotic bottom-up creativity that the current top-down system is not designed to foster. Can the dual-core processor of the socialist-oriented market economy handle this new software? This is the central question. The state's powerful, centralized control, the socialist orientation, was a tremendous asset in the early stages. It allowed for rapid infrastructure development and the enforcement of a consistent, long-term industrial policy. But that same top-down control can become a liability when it comes to fostering the kind of freewheeling, risk-taking, and often disruptive culture that innovation requires. True innovation cannot be commanded from a central plan. It emerges from the unpredictable interactions of a dense network of researchers, entrepreneurs, and venture capitalists. It requires an education system that rewards critical thinking over rote memorization. It requires a legal system that rigorously protects intellectual property. And it requires a society that is willing to tolerate failure, which is an essential part of the creative process. We see the leadership in Hanoi attempting to address this. The national strategy on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the massive investments in digital infrastructure, the courtship of semiconductor giants, and the ambitious goals for VinFast are all part of a concerted push to climb the value chain. The resource gambit in rare earths is a strategic play to own the foundational assets of the future economy. They are trying to use the powerful state core of their system to direct the market core towards these higher value activities. But the question remains whether this top-down push is sufficient. The next leap requires a qualitative change, not just a quantitative one. It requires a shift from a disciplined workforce to a creative one. It requires a system that trusts its individual nodes to experiment, to innovate, and even to challenge the status quo. This may require a subtle but profound recalibration of the relationship between the state and the market, between control and freedom. So as we look to 2026 and beyond, the analysis leads us to this final checkpoint. The machine that was designed in the wreckage of the 1980s has reached the limits of its initial programming. The externalities, environmental and social, are creating significant drag on the system. The path forward is no longer as clear as it once was. The next phase is not about building more roads or bigger factories. It is about building the intangible infrastructure of a knowledge economy. Vietnam's architects proved they could master the geopolitics of the assembly line and the geology of rare earths. Now, they face their greatest test, mastering the complex, unpredictable, and ultimately human geography of innovation itself. The machine must learn to upgrade its own code, and the world is watching to see if it can. Script segment output. Direction notes. Music. The music becomes thoughtful, complex, and slightly ambiguous. The dissonant tones of the previous segment resolve, but not into a triumphant fanfare. Instead, the synth track becomes a complex, multi-layered tapestry of sound, suggesting a difficult, uncertain, but crucial process of transformation. It should feel like a system diagnosing itself, running simulations for the future. Visuals are forward-looking and conceptual. Use the latter metaphor from the image prompts. Show the climb from simple manufacturing to a much more difficult, abstract level of innovation. Animate blueprints for the next version of the Vietnamese economic OS, showing a shift from hardware factories to software R&D, design, finance. Pacing. The narrator's tone is now that of a strategist weighing the odds. It is analytical, forward-looking, and frames the conclusion as a critical, open-ended question. The delivery is measured and authoritative, synthesizing all the previous points into a final, coherent strategic assessment for the year 2026 and beyond. Direction notes. Title line: The 2026 checkpoint. Navigating the middle income trap. Title line. Dialogue block. We arrive at the present moment, the 2026 checkpoint. This year is significant because it marks the beginning of the next 5-year plan, the period where the strategies designed today will either succeed or fail. The Vietnamese economic machine has performed brilliantly. It has executed its primary directive, achieving middle-income status through export-oriented manufacturing, with ruthless efficiency. But in the logic of systems, every solution creates a new set of problems. The very success of the model has now propelled Vietnam into the most dangerous and difficult stage of national development, the middle-income trap. The trap is a well-documented phenomenon. It's the point where a country becomes too rich to compete with low-wage manufacturing economies, but not yet innovative enough to compete with high-income, technology-driven economies. It's the point where the old operating system, based on imitation and assembly, hits its performance ceiling. To continue to grow, to reach the stated goal of becoming a high-income nation by 2045, requires a fundamental system upgrade. It requires a second round of creative destruction, one even more difficult than the first. This time, Vietnam must creatively destroy the very model that made it successful.